This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry about that. There you go.
Oh, no worries. If you're familiar with the ECaTS system, then you do know that you can find all of that same contact information in the ECaTS portal as well. So anytime you log in to ECaTS, and even prior to logging in, you do always have the support information at the bottom of the right-hand corner. And I wanted to touch on our support setup and how that works with the group here before we get started. So again, thank you for having me. My name is Jordan. I've been with ECaTS for about 8 years now. So some of you may have seen a training that I did or something of that nature a couple years ago. But I'm now Ops Director and I manage a support group. You probably often work with Dustin, but he's on PTO today, so I thought I would take the training and take the opportunity to talk to everybody. So again, thanks for having me. We, as you know, have had some changes within the ECaTS team over the past couple of years since we have changed who we're owned by, basically. So you do see some Intrado terminology and things like that through the system. One of the biggest benefits we've seen on the ECaTS side since that change is the ability to utilize our 24/7 help desk. So ECaTS has always been 8 to 5 Pacific time because we're located in California. And we've always had business hours for our team, but obviously you don't. So it makes more sense to provide 24/7 support. This phone number will take you to the general help desk. If you call this number and it's during ECaTS business hours, what they'll do is they'll actually reach out to our team over an internal chat we have, and they'll ask if anyone's available on that ECaTS team to take the call directly. And that way you still have the ability to get real-time support from the ECaTS team. But if it's not ECaTS business hours, then the help desk will go ahead and create a ticket. It'll get assigned to our team and we'll work that as soon as we're available. If there's anything that the Intrado help desk can help with in the meantime, then of course they'll do that as well. So it just increases our opportunities for support, but we still want to offer that real-time access to ECaTS. If you don't want to call, of course, you always have the option to email us at support@ecats911.com. That creates a ticket in our ticketing system and we'll work it that way. And you also have your live chat option once you get into the system. And that'll pop up just by going to the support tab. So what I was going to do today was just go over some of the newer features and things that have been added into the ECaTS system. And through that process, we'll kind of touch on some of the standard tenets of the system. Before I do that, I don't know if it's appropriate with the size group we have here, but I am curious if there are any general questions before we go into the system itself. Okay. All right. Well, don't hesitate to stop me if you see something that you have additional questions on, or you can feel free to send those emails to me after, whatever I can do to assist. So a couple of things that have been added, at least since we last talked to the ECaTS system, are some additional checkboxes and filter options that I think are definitely valuable, but maybe a little bit less obvious as you're clicking around the portal. So one of those is down here at the bottom. You have a new drop down that is titled voice. It's where you're going to add in your voice and text calls if you want to. So one thing we're going to go over today is your text to 911 report. Those are in the separate section here. Those are your actual text to 911 reports, right? But if you also have MIS data and text data, and you're utilizing these standard reports here, then you can choose to include your voice calls, which is default, because that's how the system has always worked. We don't want to change your default output. You can do just voice calls, or you can change it to be voice and text calls, or just text calls only. So this way you can use some of those MIS reports that you've been currently using to get totals for your text data and potentially combine them with your voice or your calls as well, if that's what you'd like to do. So because we added this option, of course, we also added that field to the report header. So when you generate the report, it's going to tell you what selection you've made. So if you're providing it to anybody, then you know what data is in there if you need to recreate it. But it is a newer filter that I wanted to point out because especially as text becomes more prevalent, you want to include that in your statistics in some cases. And so here's where you can do that. And we will touch on the text report specifically a little bit later. So that is the voice and text filter. It's not available on every single report, but it is available on most. So if it's there, it will work with the report. So I do encourage you to take a look at that and then let us know if you have any questions. So that is the voice and text filter. The next thing that I wanted to touch on was the top PSAP metrics answer time report. The report's been around for some time, and it originally was just called top PSAP metrics. We've specified that it's answer time because there are some reports that use the ring time metric, and that becomes particularly relevant if you're in a ring all environment versus ACD, where you really want to look at just the time that your call takers are really responsible for and have control over. So if you at your PSAP is interested in using this report to look further at ring times as opposed to answer times, again, just let our team know, and that's something that we can assist with. But the default report is answer time. And answer time is defined as the time that elapses from call seizure or trunk seizure to when the call is answered by a call taker. So what it's doing is it's looking at the full time from essentially a caller's experience to when the call first hit the PSAP to when it was answered, which of course will vary from the time that the call taker has control over. They can't control how long it takes to route through the equipment or anything like that. So again, often in a ring all environment, you may want to look at ring time. So like I said, if you have any questions, let us know, but everyone will have access to and does have access to this top PSAP metrics answer times report. And an option that's been added to the report is this expanded answer time option. And what it'll do is it will offer additional answer time information in the report output. Like I said, I now need to generate these as we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select last full month. And my period group here is month. And what that means is I'm going to get one set of output for the last month. Say I were to do my period, my date range of year to date. This means I want multiple months of data. Because my period group is set to month, I'm going to get one report output per month for the entire date range I've selected. If I change this to all, I'm going to get all of the data combined in one report output from year to date. So you're using your period group combined with your date range to determine what your report output looks like. And I'll touch on this a little bit more throughout the system because it is something that you can use to really get the output you're looking for. But of course, you need to understand a little bit about how you can get there. So I thought we'd touch on that a bit. So let's go ahead and generate this one so you can see what the normal version of top PSAP metrics looks like, and then we'll go ahead and do the expanded answer time so that you can see the output there as well. While this is generating, this is actually something, it's a little bit newer. This button didn't used to gray out. So if you've been a long-time ECaTS user, you're familiar with essentially hitting generate and then maybe waiting a second for the new tab to open. But because this didn't turn gray, most people, and including myself, tend to just hit generate over and over, right, until you get it. So this way you know the report's actually generating, and then over in this tab you can see that it's running and when you made the request as it goes. So that's been added in as well just to offer some more transparency into what the system is doing. But I don't know how familiar the group is with the scheduling options, but that's also something that I wanted to point out to the group. Throughout the system, you have the ability to schedule your report. And these reports then can be scheduled to be emailed to you on a daily basis, a monthly basis, and you can also copy people on those scheduled reports. So you have the ability to, say you want to schedule a Top Annie report, which is like your frequent caller report, and there's someone that it would be relevant or reasonable for them to maybe receive that information once a month or every quarter, but it may not be something that you want to look at every single day. Or maybe you have a shift supervisor who manages a particular shift and you want them to get answer time reports emailed daily or weekly for that particular shift. Well, by combining all of the different filter options that you have and then scheduling reports against those filters, then you have the ability to kind of customize what gets generated by the system automatically and doesn't require you to access the system as often. So, you know, talking about shifts, you could come in and utilize the time block feature and say, okay, I want all of my shifts that happen from, I don't know, maybe run 12 from 6 to 6 or something like that. You put your time frames in, and then it's going to grab that slice of time from every day that falls into the date range you've selected. So say I'm running it on last month, and I know that they're working specific days of the week, for example, or maybe I just want to do an analysis on my weekends, or you know, you have all these different combinations here of ways that you can look at the data and slice it up, so you can look at only certain days of week, only certain blocks of time, and then again, you have your date range as well. So just something to keep in mind. I think this day of the week is also fairly new, and it's now available across most of your reports. So also something that can be interesting as you start to utilize the system. Of course, now things are generating slowly because I need them to generate in real time. Of course, I'm also at home, so let me move and see if I can get some better Wi-Fi in a different location. Speed this up a little bit here. We are closed out here in California. Okay. Much closer to all of the equipment now. Give us another shot. So I love the top PSAP metrics report. If you're not familiar with it, I think personally it's an even better option than the day in review report. The day in review report is great, and it gives you a good summary of, you know, call counts and some basic answer time information and things like that. The top PSAP metrics report gives you even more than that. It gives you some basic TTY information and also some text data as well, now that we're starting to have that more frequently. And then, of course, you now have the ability to expand your answer time. So here's the basic output of the report. Let me zoom in here. And we're seeing some general overall information here, the number of calls that were answered, the number abandoned, the percentage abandoned. And then here again, you're seeing those text sessions. So this is another report that does give you that data for both sides of the house. You also have your basic answer times, class of service. I really love how this class of service is displayed. If you're familiar with the class of service report, that breaks out each individual class of service. So you have your cell, you have wireless phase 1, phase 2, and then you have residential, business, et cetera. And this gives you a good summary of your wireless and wireline counts, as well as your VoIP and telematics as those start to become more popular. You also have some overall non-911 totals, so your 10-digit lines, if those are profiled as such, as well as administrative, and then some outbound totals and averages across the report. Here you get some additional details on text data, average session durations, and how many messages tend to be in each session. And then I did mention TTY data as well, so we're going off of TTY flags in the CDR data, and that's how we're reporting them in this report. So I personally like this. I think it's a really good overall view, something to look at, or it often answers many of the questions that you may get in surveys or certain requests looking for call counts and whatnot. So I would recommend scheduling this or at least taking a look. Again, you do now have this expanded answer time option. So when you generate the report, it's just going to expand the answer time section and show you more breakouts, essentially, on your time. And we are aware of, changing answer time standards through NINA, and of course, we'll address those within the ECaTS system without losing any functionality as time goes on. So here's where we've broken it out here. So you're just seeing every 5-second increment with the values as opposed to just 10, 15, 20, and 40. So that checkbox will now appear when you go to generate that report. So that's it for the top PSAP metrics answer time report. We also have a new checkbox that's been added to the calls per hour by day of week report. This report is exactly what it sounds like. It's calls per hour by day of week. But it's fairly busy if you're trying to use it, especially if you're trying to get totals out of it. So when you generate the report, the default output is quite large, and it has all of your days of the week across and all of your hours of the day down the left-hand side. Of course, if you're generating this, you could choose to select certain days of the week so that it essentially shrinks the report. Using time block will do that as well, right? Because there'll be less hours displayed, but sometimes that may not meet your needs. So we've added in a totals only checkbox, and the idea is to essentially shrink the report and just give you the overall totals that you have in each of the columns so that it's a little bit more digestible. So we'll give that a chance to run for the first output. And we'll see what it looks like with totals only. All right, we'll let that go for a second. I'm going to get started on answer time. So what I wanted to show you today for answer time is not necessarily a new feature, but I think it's something that it may not be as obvious, and I think it's useful. So, and it helps also display the value in understanding how the period groups and the date ranges work together to get reports. So when you go to use your answer time report, what it does is it gives you your answer times and it displays them in an hourly format. So you have your answer times for the 0 hour, the 1 o'clock hour, 2, so on and so forth. That's great if that's what you're looking at and you're looking for hourly totals, but many times you're not necessarily looking for answer time information that maybe spans a month worth of data, but then is by hour. Maybe you want to look at your times by week or even by day. But when you go to utilize the system, if you're not using this PSAP grouping option, which I'm going to show you, then what will happen is you're going to get a report output for every day. And the reasoning is the format of the report, how it functions with period groups. So talking a little bit more about that. Say I'm looking for my monthly answer time percentages for my PSAP, and I want them for year to date. If I go to PSAP answer time and I choose year to date, and then by default over here is going to be months. If I just left this on their default, essentially what I'm going to get is 11 report outputs because I've chosen 11 months, this year to date, and I've chosen months. I'm going to get 1 report per month. Now, if I change this to all, instead I'm going to get 1 report that includes all of the data in its output. So I'm going to get 1 report output that represents all of year to date because I've chosen to include the entire date range within my output. If that doesn't make any sense because what are you going to do with those 12 outputs and those hourly things? You probably need to enter it into something or be able to look at it on more of a trending type basis. It becomes very difficult with those report outputs. So I would recommend instead using your PSAP grouping option. And normally this is utilized by those that have access to multiple PSAPs. So maybe you have a jurisdiction and you're trying to kind of combine data and look at like the county as a whole or something of that nature. But it actually works with just a single PSAP as well. So if you're looking for example, monthly totals on your answer time report, what you can do is you can choose this PSAP grouping option. And then go ahead and select report all PSAP data separately. And what it's going to do now is it's essentially going to break it up and change how we display your data. Now, in this case, I want to display it by month. I still want my monthly totals, but I want it year to date, and I don't want 11 report outputs for each one with my hourly information. I want my monthly information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to output that having used this PSAP grouping option. Now, here's what the report looks like. Keep in mind, I ran this on all calls, so this output also includes admin call data. So these are not 911 answer times. But this is the report where we've done it year to date, and it has all of the data in one output. So my period group here is all. Again, if I hadn't set my period group to all, I'd have one output that looks exactly like this, but for each individual month. With our new grouping option, which we're going to show you here, this is where we're going to see the data displayed by month. So we're going to see monthly totals all in one report instead of multiple outputs. And that way you can still get the same information, but again, it's a bit more digestible and it's easier to look at. So here you now can see the PSAP on the left, and you can see the months listed and then the overall answer time. So it's essentially shrinking the report and getting you all of the totals from each of the outputs. So I think this is a great option depending on what you're looking to do. But again, you know, please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you're trying to get something out of the system, but you're not sure if it's possible, or you tried and it won't work. But that's what our team is here for, and we want to help you with that in particular. So please do let us know if there's something you're trying to get, to see if either we can show you how to do it in the system or find a workaround or whatever we can do to assist. So this is your answer time report output where I've utilized that PSAP grouping feature. Again, you do also have the option to start to include your text in these as well. Just being careful, you know, what types of calls you include as you're running these reports. Make sure that you do switch it to 911 if that's what you want to look at, because obviously your admin calls are going to impact your overall answer times. So that takes me through the little answer time portion that I wanted to show you. Now, we also have a new feature that we've added in regards to agent reporting. And we've always had this inherent issue within ECaTS that once we get a agent's name in the data and it's time to store a call against that agent, our agent list grows each time we see a new agent. And if that call taker leaves the PSAP, of course, we still have calls that were taken by that call taker at some time. So we need them in the system within some capacity, but your list can get really big and hard to manage. And so as you're running your reports, you may see in your calls by agent dropdown way more agents than you currently have at your PSAP. And so to address that, on the ECaTS side, we've built some new functionality into the system. And that functionality is essentially this Find Activity button. So what this is going to do is once you select your date range, I'm going to do a smaller date range. Once you select a date range and your PSAP, then you can come down here and you can choose to Find Activity. And it's going to trim your agent list to display only the agents that actually took calls or had activity for the date range you selected. So that way you don't have this big long list of people that don't necessarily work for you anymore, and you're not having to look for calls from a certain agent during that time frame, something like that. So that's awesome. You have that functionality there, and that works for all the different agent reports in the system as you walk through them and you run them. But talking a little bit more about the functionality, it does have an additional level as well. And essentially, you have the ability to access an administrative section of the portal, which will determine if agents no longer show up in the drop-down based on visibility settings that you've selected. So it's not something that we've rolled out to every single user because, of course, if it got into the wrong hands, you could have agents disappearing from drop-downs that maybe you need. So, of course, we want to make sure that we're careful as to who has that level of access and control over the system. But it is a module that can be adjusted on your side, or we can help you adjust if you feel that that's an issue for you. So if when you go to run your agent reports, you just have this huge long drop-down, you don't want to use find activity every time. Obviously, it's not going very quickly for me right this second. You can prune that list, and it doesn't take them out of the system. It doesn't remove them permanently by any means. It simply will hide them from this drop-down by default. On the other side, you can also build groups. So if you choose to build agent groups, you can go in and say, okay, I have my A shift, my B shift, my C shift, and you could drop call takers into those groups. And you could then select that group when you generate the report instead of a particular agent. So it kind of depends on, how your PSAP is set up and how you want to run your reports, but there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more that you can customize essentially now with your agent reporting as you go to generate your reports. So you should just have that find activity button there. If you do have interest in further administration, visibility updates, just let our team know and we'll walk you through the process. We'll make sure you have all the access that you need, and we'll make sure, of course, that we're working with the state so that there's no concerns with visibility or anything of that nature. So it's an exciting feature because it's been a long-standing item that we haven't quite known how to address on the ECaTS side, but it doesn't normally take this long, I promise. But you now have this option here to help you adjust that drop-down. So once you generate the report, the output's exactly the same as you're used to. You have calls by agent, which is your call counts by agent. You have your agent answer time and ring time, which is looking at both of those values by call taker, and so forth. You also, of course, have your agent option within Adhoc if you want to dig further into additional agent activity or something of that nature. So while this does its thing, let's hop back over to the calls per hour by day of week. I did want to show you just the different outputs real quick. And this, again, was in regards to the totals filter. So this is the full output of the report. You can see your hours on the left-hand side and then your days of week across the top here. And obviously, it's a lot. You have your average calls. Not only do you do totals, we're also doing average calculations as well as max counts, which, again, can be very useful depending on what it is you're looking at, but it can also be too busy. So using that totals only checkbox allows you then to shrink the report and just get your overall totals. So this is what the output would look like if that checkbox has been selected. So that's your calls per hour by day of week report with that new option. I'm done waiting for this right this second. There we go. All right. Well, I'll give that another shot in a second, but what I want to do first is jump to the text reports. Your text reports are in a different section of ECaTS, but you access them with the same login you always use for ECaTS. So once you log in, you're going to scroll down, and you're going to see, you should see a Text 911 report tab on the left-hand side. If you don't, when you log in, let us know, and we will adjust your access so that you have it. It is an individual permission that we turn on for each person that has text reporting. So if for some reason you don't have it there, let us know. We'll get your text report drop-down added. And then once you click on this here, then you'll have all of your text reports listed on the left-hand side. So here's where you're going to start actually running your text report. And to explain a little bit about how it works in ECaTS, your call handling data is being collected from the Vesta equipment. So we get data out of the CDR port there. It's like the call detail record. That's what we use to report and to build the MIS reports within ECaTS. For the text data, it works a little bit differently. We actually collect that data directly from the TCC. So we have RDDMs like what we have at the VESTA. We also have those at the TCC level. And we collect data from there, and that's how we build the reports that you see in ECaTS. So it's a little bit of a different data source, but of course you're able to access it all from the same system. So once you log in, you should see your text reports there. The biggest report that everyone's always looking for is the session transcript. This report's going to give you the actual conversation and the discussion that was had, what was typed. So there are some additional options you have to prune down this report or assist you in your analysis. One of those is the MDN. This is the mobile dialing number. It's the same as an ANI. It's just the text version of that. So it's just the call taker's or the caller's phone number. But you also have search terms, and this is essentially a keyword search. So if there's a certain word that you're looking for within a text conversation or something of that nature, you can come in and you can type that word in. You can look for it just in agent messages, only in caller messages, and then also in both if you wanted to do that. I think this refreshed my, reflect my site. And I'm just going to go ahead and do year to date. Now, prior to our training, I went ahead and generated some reports so I knew what keyword would come up. But of course, you could generate a longer report if you're looking to isolate something in particular and then put in the search term. But the way that it functions is pretty cool. It'll comb through and then identify the words you're searching for. It will tell you how many times it shows up overall, and then it will tell you how many sessions it showed up in. So maybe the word was used 10 times, but it only showed up in one text session. This would say 10, and this would say 1. So I went ahead and typed one in that I knew would get me output. When the word shows up in the output, it'll highlight that piece of the conversation. So here's a text that has some general information on it I thought I'd show you. You can see the mobile dialing number, as we discussed. You can see the session start, so it's when the overall session began, and then when it ended. We're going to give you any additional information we have, like the carrier, the total number of messages. Of course, typically you'll have more messages than you do sessions. And then your overall session duration. Also, if we have this available as a data element, we will load in the lat long and then any additional location updates if they occur. So because I look for that word, I can see that this piece of the conversation has been highlighted. But this is a really great example of really exciting, in my opinion. It was cool to see, just a really exciting use of text 911 and an eventual resolution, at least from this piece of the interaction with the caller. So of course you're getting the times that everybody sent their messages, and I'll just point this out here. You do see unknown agent, and it's a function of the data that we're getting from the TCC. Unfortunately, we're not getting the agent's name who was logged in porting back to the TCC. So it's something we're working on so that we can pull that data into reports. Unfortunately, though, this unknown agent is currently expected. So if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out. But I did want to point that out because, unfortunately, that is what we expect to see there right now. Let's see. So that's your session transcript report. Again, I pruned it down quite a bit because I searched against a certain keyword, but you can run this on the whole year. And as it stands, we're not currently purging data. Of course, we would work with the state if that was the plan, but as it stands right now, you're going to have all of your text data within the system along with your MIS data as well. This is your session transcript. There was just a couple other text reports I thought I would touch on today. One of them is your text summary. This is slightly similar to your top PSAP metrics report. And what it's going to do is all of the data that you've selected for your data range is going to output within one report. You do also have the option to, again, use PSAP grouping if for some reason you have access to multiple sites. But I like this report. Again, I think it gives you kind of good overall view of what's going on with your text. Whereas a lot of the individual reports are going to give you pieces, of course, deeper insight into them. But I think this is a good summary. So, of course, whenever we talk about totals, we need to talk about your sessions and your messages. So your overall number of sessions then is going to show up here. The reason there's an outgoing session section is that some places can initiate text, and a lot of times it's done to like resolve abandoned calls, things like that. So if that was happening, then we would count those outgoing sessions as well. But most of the time, we just see incoming there, and then you get your total. Now, for your messages, of course, we expect both incoming and outgoing. And then here's some other general information. So we're looking at the number of busiest hours. Again, number of sessions versus messages. Sessions, we're looking at really how many new interactions are started. And then here we're looking at how many messages are happening within those. And again, I chose quite a long date range. I did year to date, but you could do it by month and you'd start to see probably some addressable trends as you start to look at that further. The next things that we're looking at are speed of response, essentially. So the first one is the initial agent speed of answer. So this is the first time that the text gets picked up. So this is essentially from what we would think of as trunk seizure, but from when this first text was received until the first call taker responded. Now, of course, then throughout the life of the session, you're going to have multiple messages that need to be sent, and each one of those has its own response time, essentially. So what this is doing is it's taking all of the agent average speed of response. This is taking all of the responses for every single individual message and then giving you the percentage that fall within each breakout. So the idea is, okay, how quickly are we getting to the initial text versus once you're engaged in the conversation, how long is it taking? Of course, another piece of that is looking at how long the texter takes to send a response back, because your agents can be as quick, they could be sending something the same second, but if your texter isn't going to respond for a minute or two, it's going to increase, especially the duration of those conversations. So, especially when you're starting to look at maybe a particular conversation or interaction, this can be valuable to look at, or maybe a certain call taker or something of that nature. Or maybe a texter who's texting all the time and taking a very long time to respond and therefore increasing your duration. So again, it's all related, but it's good to understand some of those different pieces. And then lastly, we're doing some calculations on the average number of messages per session. So it looks like on average, there's almost 7 incoming and outgoing messages per session. So that's the text summary report. Again, you're going to see in all of your headers the dates that you selected for the report. So as discussed, I did year to date, so it's showing me the report dates listed there that I selected. And let's see, everything else for your text reports really are very similar to what you're used to seeing when you're doing your call reporting. We're looking at durations, we're looking at who's texting you the most. So that's like, for example, what this sessions from saying MDN is going to give you. This is essentially your frequent texter report, much like your top Annie report that you're used to in the ECaTS MIS system. So these ones can be interesting to look at to try to identify potential abusers of the system. And then a lot of times some of you may recognize certain phone numbers because it's a test number or something like that. But so here you can see that we had a particular phone number texting in 29 times this year so far. So I may look, if I was not aware of what this data was, I don't know this number, off the top of my head personally. So I might go and actually pull some call record information on that, or maybe I would run this on a different date range to see when those were going on, and to maybe dig it into it a little bit. But this is where you can see essentially your frequent texters by phone number.
as well as who's taking a lot of time on those text conversations. So, you know, they may have the same number of sessions, but they're taking up more of your operator's time by spending more time in that interaction. So some additional data points to look at there. Now, let's see, text messages per hour. Again, we're getting call counts per hour. This one's good because it gives you your incoming and your outgoing. You can look at it that way. We talked about agents and how I don't have the agent. We don't get the agent names in the data, unfortunately. However, we did still keep these reports here for a particular reason, and that's because you can still get answer time data from them, even if you don't have the individual agent names. So we still found some value here if you wanted to run it. Again, maybe you had additional PSAPs you wanted to combine into the output, different date ranges you want to run, that at least you can get some basic answer time information, even if we aren't able to break it out by agent yet. So you have agent average speed of response. Again, this is all response times, so all the way throughout the session. And then you also, again, have the initial agent speed of answer, and that's going to be the first response. You also do see terminology around initial agent, and the reasoning is that you can potentially switch agents within the text conversation. So if it started with one person, but maybe transitioned to another, we're wanting to look at reporting on who it is that's taking those texts initially. And so that's why you're seeing messages by initial agent. Again, we don't at this time have that agent information, but as it becomes available, then you'll see that within the report. So that initial agent terminology is referring to the first agent that took the text. I'd say that pretty much covers us for the base of the system, the things you're really going to be looking for. Again, you're going to look for call counts or session and message count. And of course, understanding what your response times look like, the durations, how much time it's taking out of, you know, from your call taker's day, and then what those conversations look like. And again, that's what you're going to find here in your session transcript. So I did not touch on this piece. This is relevant. You're on an Intrado system, so you could see there are system messages that can be sent for texting. These are not going to be messages that were sent between you and the caller or the caller and the agent. These are things that are happening a lot of times behind the scenes. Some of that location information can show up in these, things like that. So if you want to play around with it, you can select that message, this item, but you won't need it, you shouldn't need it to get your basic, you know, the actual conversation, what was typed and sent as a text between the agent and the caller. This would be like internal stuff. But you do have that option if you wanted to look at it. So that's kind of the basics of the text system. I know that we have about 15 minutes left. I can go into the Adhoc system and just spend a little bit of time there for the group. But before I do that, I wanted to stop and see if there were any specific questions, any ECaTS questions that I might be able to use the remaining time to address, as opposed to me just talking at you more. Maureen, you're there, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, cool. I was just making sure that people could hear me.
Yeah. I don't think we've got any questions, it sounds like. So.
Okay, good. I was just making sure. Okay.
No worries. Thank you so much for presenting today, Jordan. We really appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I'll just jump in real quick then. I'll just spend a couple more minutes and then I'll let everybody go.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Okay, so I did just want to show you the Adhoc system. Maybe it's been a while since you've used ECaTS, or maybe you haven't had a chance to use it yet. That being said, if there's anyone on the call that hasn't been through an ECaTS training and wants one, both for the full tech system or the full MIS system or anything else, please let us know. All training is included at no additional cost through your contract. So we are here to do webinars if you need refreshers or you have new people or anything like that. So just let us know. But since we have a little bit more time, here in the Adhoc system, this is where you can kind of do some custom reporting. So a lot of times you'll want to come in here if you're searching for calls from a certain phone number, or maybe all of your calls with a certain class of service or something like that. I wanted to show the way that I prefer to use the system because I find a lot of value in it, and it doesn't require as much, like generating and then going back and then looking at your output and maybe saying, oh, I needed to add this field, or I wanted to filter this out, something of that nature. So what I've learned that I prefer is to select more fields and then work my output in Excel. So this is the standard Adhoc system within ECaTS. This is more UI heavy than the advanced version. And so what you're seeing here is a bunch of different fields that are available within the ECaTS system. So you're familiar with many of these terms, and if you weren't, you could use this little question mark here to tell you what the field is. But what this is doing is, if you select a checkbox, it's going to include that field in your report output. And I chose a date range up here. I'm sorry, I blew past that. I chose the date range. I went ahead and did just this current month. You have your drop downs here. You can select your dates. And then you also have these little scrubbers. It's kind of hard to see. I used now because I just wanted to take it to right now. But you could change your times by using these scrubbers or typing it in if you wanted to. But I like this option. So then maybe you have an actual phone number you want to search for. You could then put that name in, or number, whatever you have, and it will filter your outputs by that number. And that's what I mean about, I would sometimes like to get a bigger output and then filter from there and include the fields I'm looking for and search for things in my Excel output versus playing around too much with my filters. Now, if I know for sure what the phone number is, this is a great way to isolate that information quickly. But if you're looking to do a bit more of an analysis or really look at maybe how answer seconds relate to certain call types, or how abandoned calls with short durations look from certain phone numbers. There's a lot of different things, of course, you can choose to look at as you isolate different data elements, but I like to just get a big set and work from there. So over here, you check your boxes to include the field. If it's a drop down, if you choose all, it will add that field to the output. If you choose a specific one, it's going to filter the output by that field. So if I chose residential, I would only get residential calls in my output. I just want the information. So then over here, you have some calculation. We're looking at answer seconds. I could say I want all my calls that were answered in over 10 seconds and start to look at those. But I'm just going to go ahead and include the field. And then lastly, you do have some that are true-false. So like abandoned is a true-false field. You chose true, would give you all calls that were abandoned. False, all calls that weren't. I just want to include the information there instead. So again, lots of different things that you can pull. You can get different agent role names that are coming up, different agents, for example. So it just depends on what you're looking for. But before you generate, I would highly recommend that you select your Excel output option. The old option limits you to about, I think, 65,000 rows. So hopefully that's enough, but if not, and if you have the option, I'd always recommend the newer version. So just go ahead and at that point generate the report once you've picked the fields to add that you want to, and it'll open up in Excel for you. Now, I think that the Excel version is really clean, which makes it pretty easy to work with. There's not a lot of formatting going on. They're really just clean cells so that you can work with the data the way that you're looking to. I think I may need to change my application that I'm sharing because I think I was just set to Chrome. So real quick, show you Excel and then, all right. We should see an Excel sheet on the screen now. This is some of the basic output that I just got. something, and I'm glad we did it this way, something I really want to point out is that as you start to use the system, of course you're going to have certain fields that aren't present if you're looking at admin calls. And of course, one of those is going to be like your alley Annie or the address from the alley, even class of service. So when you're generating your report, you always want to include your call type field, which I didn't, but you want to go ahead and add in all so that when you get your output, you can filter it by that call type and potentially exclude some of these with missing fields if that's what you're looking for. But once you have this output, say I'm trying to look at all of my wireless phase 2 calls. I can go through here, select my headers, and then add a filter on in Excel. And then at that point, I can just go and say, okay, I want all of my phase 2 calls. And then I can get my output that way. And maybe I want to look at all my phase 2 calls that were abandoned. And I can narrow it down there, and so on and so forth. So I really like to get a bigger output and kind of work it in Excel other than going back to the UI and kind of playing around there. Of course, whatever you're more comfortable with is great, but that option is there. If you're working in ad hoc and you need assistance, let us know. We have the option to save the reports, the templates, and then share them with you directly so that you don't have to build it on your side. As I was going through that, I'm so sorry. I do want to point out, there is your call detail records report, and I just know it's been a long time since we've all talked, so I do want to point it out. If you are searching for a call from a certain phone number, you don't have to go to your raw data, and you don't have to go to ad hoc. You can go to your call detail records report, and you can type in that phone number here, and it'll pull you a list of all of the calls with that phone number. And when you do that, you can, from that point, get some additional information on the calls as well as the individual CDR records. So being on the large hosted system that you're on, of course, the data output from the Vesta is quite large, and it can be a lot to sift through and consume. So we wanted to offer a better option of how to isolate that call data. So I just ran this for last full day. These are all of my calls. I can choose to open some additional detail on the call, just basic info, by clicking that icon there. So I can see just some general information on the call, overall class of service, call type, answer seconds, location, etc. And then if I want to, I can also click the CDR option, and I can pull the data from here. So this is the actual raw CDR that came out of the Vesta, and this is essentially what created the call in the ECaTS system. So this is your unaltered raw data straight out of the equipment. And then this is a more parsed and viewable way of accessing it. So if you're ever looking for calls from a certain phone number or just to see what happened in your center and need a list of calls for that day, then I would recommend using your call detail records report. And that's this report here in your report list. And that's it, I promise.
Thank you, Jordan. We appreciate your presentation today.
Oh, of course. Thank you for having me.
You bet.